Film Club.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Film Club. I'm one of your hosts, Andy Harrison, and with me, as always, it's Andy Donaldson.
Hello.
Every week in Film Club, we invite you along to watch a film with us, and this week, we're taking a look at Scarface.
This is the story of Tony Montana. For anyone who's a Michael Bublé fan, Scarface is Tony Montana coming over from Cuba as a refugee, as he says, and he's had a bit of history with crime. And he comes over and he's looking for a job. He's just working as a dishwasher, and he's like, "Give me more money, give me more money." So he befriends a local mafia or gangs, and then he gradually rises up. And then as he rises up, he falls. So Andy, is this your first time watching Scarface?
Yeah, so this is my first time seeing Scarface. Just to clarify, it's my first time seeing this version of Scarface.
Yeah, it's a remake.
Obviously, it's a remake of a 1930s film called Scarface, The Shame of the Nation. It's a Howard Hawks film. This version, the 1983 version, is directed by Brian De Palma, who is a fantastic director. Do you remember last time we talked about Brian De Palma was probably Blowout?
Oh God, Blowout! Yeah, I remember that with John Travolta.
Yep, which was
Yeah,
funny
yeah.
because we were paralleling Blowout to The Conversation, which was directed
shit.
by Francis Ford Coppola, who did The Godfather.
Yeah.
Now this is, like I said, 1983, which means that you've got Brian De Palma coming off of Blowout. It's actually the film he did immediately following it. But you've also got Al Pacino, who has already done Godfather, he's already done Dog Day Afternoon, he's already done The Godfather Part 2. He's already made a name for himself. But Scarface, now, looking back, is, for him, one of his most defining roles. It's a role that I think Al Pacino takes to absolutely wonderful heights. The film itself, I really like it for about the first half. And then as you sort of enter the sort of second half of Act 2, it starts to drag. And then by the time you're in Act 3, by the time you're in that last third, yeah, I started feeling it. The film is almost 3 hours long.
Yeah.
And like we've said in the past, long film does not necessarily mean it's going to drag. It's all about pacing. And I think the first 2/3 of this film move pretty well. They move at quite a good clip. But that last third, for me, just really slows down and really does start to feel like, can we wrap this up?
I agree. I've seen this once before when I was in college, 12 years ago or something. Back then, I watched it, not knowing the full legend behind it, but knowing that Scarface was a big name of film. And I enjoyed it, seeing all those moments come up, say hello to my little friend, these iconic scenes, iconic moments. Really watching it again, I didn't feel that same love. I like you, I really enjoyed the start, to be fair. I forgot the start bit. I remember him coming over to the port, and I don't remember the bit building his name for himself, but after that, once he started to rise in power, and I think there's a scene where he says to Frank, you don't answer to me, I answer to you, or something. I can't remember the exact words. After that, it fucking started going downhill. When he started going on his downfall himself, there's two guys at the club trying to shoot him, and he's just writhing about, this drunken man, this man who doesn't know what he wants, and everything's just like aggression. I really failed to like the character of Tony Montana. Whereas if you look at something you're saying there, is like this is one of his most defining roles. I can't agree with you. I can appreciate why he said that. To me, Tony Montana is just a dick. A full-on fucking dick throughout this film. I mean, this film's been known for its massive use of the F word and everything. And
it's funny you mentioned the use of the word "fuck" because not only does Michelle Pfeiffer mention it at one point, she sort of says, "Can you say something else? Can you use a different word?" There's actually a count I've got here. It's used 226 times in the film, and obviously by the time it came out, that was quite stirring. The film pushed boundaries purposely. It is meant to be, unpleasant, He is constantly swearing. There's lots of excessive violence, whether you see it or whether it's implied. There's tons of sort of heavy drug usage. The film has this actually quite charming little story to go with it. And when they submitted this film for certification, it got an X rating, which is an adult rating. You can't release that in wide release in cinemas. So they recut it, got another X rating. Recut it, got another X rating. Brian De Palma eventually just like refused to recut it. He was like, I'm not recutting it. It's not an X-rated film. It's not like just gratuitous. So eventually they sort of brought this panel together. They had some narcotic experts in there. They sort of reflected on it and sort of found that the film was essentially anti-drug and that therefore it should be shown to people. So,
Okay.
but then reflecting on that, Brian De Palma was like, well, hang on. I think then if we've figured this out, if we were agreeing now this is actually anti-drug, I think the first cut was also deserving of an R rating, not an X rating.
Yeah,
And
fair play to him.
the board said, no, we don't agree. So what he did, Brian De Palma, sneaky bugger, just slipped in the first cut instead. Because
When it went through.
he knew about all the red tape and people wouldn't be looking at exactly what the details were. So he just submitted the first cut.
Fair play. Balls in him. I like that. Some balls in him there.
I love that.
One of the things I think the film does really, really, really well is the contrasted, upbeat 80s music in amongst this brutality, this absolute brutality. A great example of this is the chainsaw scene, which is quite iconic. Me watching that, it's quite difficult. I'm not that good at gore, and to see that contrast of that scene and Tony Montana's face, then you've got his right-hand man in the car just blasting out these amazing 80s tunes in that kind of. I think it's Miami. I think they're in, isn't it?
Yep.
And they're just chilling in the convertible, just like having a whale of a time. That contrast of brilliant soundtrack, and the score. The score is good as well. It's quite in your face, but the soundtrack to this film is great.
And
how
why
he's
is it
used that
great?
and incorporated. What do you mean why is it? It's 80s classics.
And the music is by Giorgio Moroder. It's one of the opening credits. You get Brian De Palma, Al Pacino, you get Giorgio Moroder. It's one of the things that really set me up for liking this film. I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Because, Giorgio Moroder and his sort of history with the EDM scene. And
Yeah, it's insane. He actually composes a lot of the tracks in the actual performers and singers. So these tracks that you hear in the radio, I could be wrong.
there's some of those tracks, I'd imagine, the stuff like the club in particular, because of that whole song about like, is it move to the yayo? Because yayo was a phrase that like Al Pacino ad-libbed on the spot. He picked it up from some of his research, but then he ad-libbed it on the spot and sort of introduced De Palma to it, and that's how yayo got
yeah.
used throughout the rest of the film.
They sounded like they were just hits at the time.
And then one more little tip of the hat here to John A. Alonso, who was the cinematographer. There is some gorgeous cinematography in this film, from the production design, the lavish sort of, dark blood red mansion that eventually Tony ends up in at the end of the film. Sort of the grubbier, grimier, but neon lit early parts of the film. And the standout for me is absolutely some of the blocking for the camera moves. Because holy shit, you mentioned the chainsaw scene earlier.
Yeah,
There is a
yeah.
phenomenal shot where the camera is just allowed to wander outside. It wanders down to the car before they sort of get out of the car, and the camera wanders back up the stairs with them. It's so purposefully used to build tension with a non-compressed piece of time. We know there's no cuts going on, so we feel the urgency as they slowly walk up those stairs. I love it. Like, the cinematography in this film was astounding.
Yeah, absolutely great. Fantastic.
I'm really glad we covered this, and there's tons of really excellent stuff in Scarface, but I would be lying if I said by the end of the film I was still enjoying it as much. I was absolutely ready for it to end. There is something in Scarface that for me, it's a lack of evolution. There's almost, there comes a point where you know where the story's going, and maybe that's our own fault for watching it retroactively, for not being there in 1983,
Yeah.
watching it fresh and not knowing what was going to happen. Over the years, I know it got railed on when it came out, built up a cult status, and there's a reason for that cult status. I think there's lots to love here. It's not quite clicking for me. Maybe we watched it too soon after The Godfather.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
There is Scarface. You can let us know in the comments below what you thought of Scarface. But Andy and I are going to be back once again next week, where we're going to test Andy's patience with horror films. Because thanks to Chip, we're taking a look at Saw.
So we're begrudgingly moving on from chainsaws to bloody saws.
So until then, get watching.
Mandalorians feature quite heavily in the Old Republic.
Thank you very much for joining this episode of Film Club. I'm one of your hosts, Andy Harrison. To my right, as always, it's the Mandalorian, Annie Donaldson.
I'm not the Mandalorian, I wish I was.
Every single week in Film Club, we invite you along to watch a film with us. We dive into some of cinema's best. We're coming back here to talk it out. Andy, this week, we're not talking about the Mandalorian. We're going way back because we're talking about Rear Window.
Which is 1954 Alfred Hitchcock.
Mm-hmm.
And our best friend, James Stewart, that we know from It's Wonderful Life.
Our best friend. More importantly, have you ever seen The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance?
No.
Oh my god, I love James Stewart. I love James Stewart in general, but I love him in that.
Yeah.
So, if someone has never seen Rear View Window before, which I'm guessing a lot of people know the premise of Rear View Window, but just
Rear
in case,
Window.
oh, do you know what, I do this? I think I did it at the end of last week's episode as well. I've always
I keep
called
calling
it.
it review, and I was like, it's not called review.
It's probably me.
Window.
I'm
Yeah,
very
that's-
sorry. I've done it for years.
Rear
So what is
Window.
Rear Window all about?
Is a bloke called Jeff. He sat down and he's broke his leg, so he's in a wheelchair, and he's observing his neighbours as he do. He's got his insurance nurse who's like a bit older. He's like kind of like, oh, you know, you should move in with your girlfriend. And he's got his girlfriend who's lovely and really kind of like absolutely adores him. And he thinks he sees one of his neighbours perform a bad act. That escalates and he does more surveillance, and then eventually it culminates into an altercation between said neighbour and Jeff.
And if there's one thing that Mr. Hitchcock is known for, it's for the building of suspense and the slow rise in tension
Okay.
until eventually you hit a boiling point and everything spills over. And you didn't like it. I can see it in your face.
Yeah.
Oh God.
I know. I was. It's not that I don't like it, but I didn't buy into it.
Okay, go on. This is interesting. I didn't expect this. A plot twist, ladies and gentlemen.
I didn't like the. Well, we'll start at the very end bit. I didn't like that he came around to his house and attacked him. Because by this point, you could easily tell what was going to happen. It was all like put that way. It was like kind of put that way forward. He's obviously going to do something wrong. He's obviously going to attack him because he's scared. This has the issues I have with classic film that I did with Streetcar Named Desire. It's not that it's a bad film, but it's got a lot of that classic element about it. It's got that lots of like kind of. I felt you're saying there like the build-up of tension. I found it hard to resonate with the main character Jeff, because in the end he's built to be a protagonist, where I didn't find him really as a protagonist. I found him as this guy that's not really asked. He's like kind of like surveilling on people. He's kind of like, oh, put my finger at him, and he's like looking at this girl who's a dancer, and he's like, oh, I'm not really in love with my girlfriend, you know, I don't really want to go there. So immediately I'm like, his views don't correspond to my own. They don't like kind of like go in the same alignment. So when I'm like, when he goes on, he's like, oh, we should believe him. He's talking to the detective, oh, this guy's doing that. I'm thinking, I actually half wish that he's wrong, and it's like a character thing, and it's like, you go down this path, and this guy that we're supposed to like really relate with, what if he's wrong, and what if it becomes like an inner sort of thing?
So you wanted him to be more fallible.
Yeah, but then at the end, when it's this guy, and I think they've kind of drew this towards the end, there was that woman beneath it, it looked like she was going to commit suicide. I thought it might be her, because it's her guy, and I was thinking, now, that's a good twist. You know, what if it's her? Obviously, back in those days, you know, it's a woman. It's obviously not going to be her. It's going to be the guy that where's his wife gone. It could be her, or she could be involved somewhere.
Did you not, if you were looking for something where he was a bit more of a, less of a sort of a perfect character, is that kind of the...
It's not that. It's just the fact that we're supposed to accept his views, and I don't. I didn't.
Well, I don't think you're supposed to accept his views. I think you're just supposed to observe his views in the same way that he's kind of like observing this little community that he's around.
Okay, but then you look at his nurse and you look at his partner, and they so easily accept his views. So therefore, as an audience, so we're not supposed to easily accept his views, much like they did. Like, to observe him is fair enough, but it's like you've got two characters there saying, "Oh yes, you're right," and it's like, well, I don't think he is. So why haven't that kind of opinion forced on me? I didn't. It's not that I didn't like it. I was a bit good at the end when he did come to the door and he had this like, what do you want? It was obvious that we were going to have this battle and the window being wide open. It was obvious it was going to go outside. And I was thinking, how like the scene I did love, fucking great, is where his partner went up to the ladders in the house.
Yeah,
I was on edge.
excellent,
I was very on edge. I was thinking, this is fucking awesome. And then obviously, how cool would that be if she actually got out and it turns out it wasn't a guy? It's this poor little victim that you know, these guys have been like going and wandering the house looking through the purse and stuff. It turns out there was one beneath. So I had this massive image in my head like that. And then when it happened that way I did, I'm a bit let down. It's slow.
That's Hitchcock, and like
Yeah,
what you're kind of talking about there. I don't think a lot of Hitchcock's work is surprising and shocking. You get a few moments of it, you know, things like Psycho, especially at the time, there was moments of shock and surprise. I don't find a lot of his work to be that shocking and surprising. Sometimes you understand where it's going to go. What I do appreciate about a lot of the things he does is the way in which he implements it. It's like, for example, with Rear Window, he's really restrained in the way he operates his camera. Well, the fact that we as an audience don't get to leave that room either.
Well, it's a whole set, you know, the whole thing is on set.
Yeah.
Like, which I found fucking fascinating. But come on, carry on.
So, like, for example, when she does that scene you're talking about there, where she goes and climbs up the ladder and goes into the house, we feel as trapped as James Stewart because the camera is trapped, and instead we're on the long end of a lens.
Yeah.
We don't get to go over there. We don't get to quite hear what's going on properly and things like that.
I love that as well. Because you can't do this. When he screams, he's like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
He's almost like, he's going to see us in darkness. It's like, and he's got to cover himself. He's got to cover the woman.
And the way he creates pacing through all the different stories that are going on. Like, when you need a break from this story, we'll go and check on the woman who's having a love life issue. Yeah. Or like when we're done with that, maybe we'll go check on the guy who's struggling to write the song a little bit. Yeah. And then we'll check in with the newlyweds who are over here, sort of thing. Yeah. The way in which pacing is created through that, because he couldn't create pacing through cutting away to anything else or telling a secondary story.
I can understand that. I still personally found the main story a bit too slow, but I did enjoy. I loved it when you could transition in between the different departments and what they were doing. Also, little subtle things with the camera work where, you know, he's looking at the people on the street, you know, and they've got that lovely little perfectly aligned alleyway that you can see in the main street on the other side. That was fucking awesome. Like, really well done, that set design and stuff like that. I mean, the whole thing about the set design is absolutely phenomenal.
Speaking of set design, can we at least have a shout out for the dog basket? The couple that because it's so hot, they're living out on their balcony.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
And have fashioned this basket to have the dog go down because they can't be bothered taking it down.
The dog can go down and shit in the neighbour's garden. I love that. I absolutely love that. But yeah, that part I loved. And, like, you know, the camera work I did love as well. Like, that slow pacing of it's like going to shots like that. But even towards the end scene, despite the fact I didn't like how it turned out, where the way he's flashing and he sees his eyes come back, and it's like more and more like this. I did think it was a bit silly that the antagonist, I can't get his name, the antagonist guy, that he didn't just go like that. But as soon as he saw Jeff go like this, the antagonist didn't go, oh, he's going to do it.
I would completely agree that the end of this film gets a bit silly.
Yeah.
I'm in agreement with you. I would, given the choice, I'd get rid of that weird bit where he keeps flashing him with the bulbs.
Yeah.
And like, let me put another one in. Hang on. And like, the guy's walking forward like he's bloody Michael Myers.
Exactly. Yeah.
So minor issue for me. How did you feel then? Because I didn't expect this. How did you feel about the acting?
So this is it. I have a soft spot for James Stewart because of It's a Wonderful Life. I love that film. I love his voice is so warming. Like,
we're gonna watch The Man Who Shot Woodbury Valance.
Cool. Okay. I love him. Even Lisa, isn't it? Grace Kelly.
Grace Kelly.
I thought she was absolutely phenomenal.
So if we can stop on Grace Kelly for a second, because we got to the end of this, and Natalie turned to me and went, "Bloody love Chris Kelly," because with this sort of like role, and actresses at the time could very easily become quite shrill, and especially the way her character's written, it's a very fine line between being likable and unlikable.
I liked her character more than his.
Yeah, and she rides that line perfectly.
Yeah, because she's the caring one. She is the protagonist for me in this.
She gets,
Because she's daring, she's loving, she wants to please him. She just wants to be there for him, and he's the one that's a bit like, yeah, I can't be bothered, despite me loving James Stewart.
reminds me of you and your relationship.
Sound. So the other one we've got is Stella's his nurse, isn't it?
Yep, Stella's
So
his nurse.
Thelma Ritter.
Also great, but
yeah,
you know,
not
much
as
smaller
prominent.
part.
Yeah, not as prominent. But when she's, I love the ending like this. She goes, it made me laugh actually. Something. Do you want to go and see it? It's like I want nothing to do with this.
Yeah, yes.
I laughed at that, but besides that, everything was fine. I wasn't too keen on the cop, his mate Tom. He just looked at the stereotypical like kind of 50s.
Definitely
like,
the
his
weakest
Yeah.
performance, but doesn't have a lot to do.
It wasn't anything to do with the acting. I thought it was fine. My only moments I didn't like was when they were kissing. They were like really close, and she was kissing him. They were talking amongst that, and I was like, again, that's like kind of.
That's very at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And personally, I find nowadays, like when I look back on it, fair enough, it's at the time. I just find it unnecessary. They could have like.
It's got that romanticism about it, though. There is something interesting about in those physical moments, those romantically interesting, intense moments. That the camera is very, very tight, very close, very involved, and yet, while the rest of the film is obviously a commentary on voyeurism, and the thing that he is much more engaged in really is the voyeuristic nature of what's going on. The camera instead is much more lingering and longing, and like it's almost like he wants to be down, and you want to be in amongst the story, but you don't get to be.
I just had problems with the writing of those particular parts inside the apartment.
Yeah.
That's my main issue. It's not that it was a bad film. It's like Street Garden Desire. When I went to watch that, I enjoyed it, but I wouldn't particularly probably watch it again. Whereas other films like 12 Angry Men, fucking phenomenal that we did last week. Like I will hands down watch that again. I guess it's just a matter of taste. I do have issues where you have that kind of like, which is weird because we watch It's a Wonderful Life and that's like an old film. It's like an old like one of these classics and everything like that. But I think it's because that is like there's so much happening throughout that whole film. There's so many like scenes and scenarios and places and
you get some respite
growth.
from what's going on.
Yeah.
Whereas
this, because it's confined to one part. I mean, what you said last week is it's similar to The Conversation.
yeah.
Maybe the reason I like The Conversation more was it was probably because it was the same director who did The Godfather, so I was immediately on board. But the amount of sound records and stuff, and obviously that kind of like background unions, all that stuff. Maybe I was more interested in that. So maybe I saw through some of the slower parts because of my interest.
Also, like
personal interest.
with The Conversation, like Coppola was building on what had happened in Rear Window. Like he's taking kind of the
I can
ideas of Rear
completely see
Window
that.
and fleshing those out a lot more.
It's more modern, a lot more modern.
Yeah.
The Conversation, sorry, not Rear Window. I just
Yeah, because you hit that 70s mark of like new wave Hollywood coming in. And cinema kind of catches up roughly to where it is today in terms of its sensibilities, and The Conversation has that quite a lot.
Interesting though, very interesting. It's been a while since we've had conflicting interests.
It's a good conversation. I've enjoyed this. But anyway, there is Rear Window. You can let us know what you thought of Rear Window in the comments below, or you can hit us on Twitter, as always. Excuse me, I should not drink Coke through the show. But Andy and I are going to be back once again next week, where we're actually taking a recommendation. We're taking a recommendation from
Damien Beatty.
Damien Beatty, and Damien has recommended Seven Seal.
There was a You're friends. You go this and you go to speak to the police. You don't speak to me. Why don't you speak to me? I'm your friend.
I'm making an offer. You can't refuse.
Thank you very much for joining us for the episode of Film Club. I am one of your hosts, Andy Harrison. To my right, as always, it's the internet's Marlon Brando, Andy Donaldson.
Hello.
How would you feel about being the internet's Marlon Brando? I'd be pretty happy.
As long as I'm not associated with your impression.
Every single week in Film Club, we invite you along to watch a film with us. We dive into some of cinema's best before coming back here to talk it out. Andy, this week...
Finally fucking done The Godfather. Oh my days. We've finally done The Godfather. I'm not even going to really break it down. The Godfather is the rise and fall of the... Well, in this case, the rise of the Corleone family. That is your brief. You watch
Perfect.
it. If you don't know what it is, fucking watch it. If you haven't seen it before and you're watching this review, stop, pause it, unsubscribe, and just watch it. Then resubscribe and watch this because Christ, we do not want this spoiler for you. We don't know anything about this because to me, watching it again, it is in the top 10. It's, I didn't realise at the time. I found myself since our last watch, rewatching this so many times, so many scenes on YouTube, so many moments like this. It's 3 hours long, more or less, 177 minutes or something daft. You know how I feel. How do you feel?
So for me, right, this is we've mentioned this in the show before, but it's worth talking about here because I had never seen The Godfather, and at one point it had become like sort of an actively hadn't watched The Godfather sort of thing. You know,
What
like,
you waited for this episode?
yeah, pretty much. I mean, we
Yeah.
started doing film club. I think we made a list of films that we need
Yeah.
to review, and on that list was The Godfather. And it's pretty near the top was The Godfather, and we had a
Yeah.
discussion. I'd never seen it, and purposefully never watched it so we could have this moment right now.
Much like me with 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, exactly. But this went on way too long. And then watching it this weekend, it was absolutely bloody brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic. It is Francis Ford Coppola at his absolute highest of power.
Yep.
It's Francis Ford Coppola understanding exactly what he wants from a film and executing on it. And that is the most succinct way I can put it. Somebody who knew exactly what they wanted and did that.
I watched this again for God knows how many times. And to be fair, it's not that often, but obviously the amount of scenes. I just didn't realise how every scene, every bit of dialogue in this film is relevant to the whole film. And what I mean by that, it might be a weird thing to say, sometimes you can get filler moments, sometimes you get little conversations on the side, sometimes you can get little, almost like side quests. In The Godfather,
Side quests.
yeah, in The Godfather, everything is fucking there. Like every conversation that is present, everything that's happening has a forward goal. It helps I've seen it before. Has a forward goal, reflecting on a backwards, what's happened in the past or what's in the present. Like I know people say that about every film, you know, dialogues, you know, written and scripts and stuff like that. Fucking watch this, and every bit of dialogue is relevant to the film, and relevant to The Godfather, relevant to the family's progression, and everything like that. It was, oh my days, it was mind blowing watching it again. It was nice analysing it. It was,
It's all.
Where do
It's
we
all.
start?
So it's all wrapped in what I think is one of my favorite things about the entire film, which is the cinematography. It's some of the most beautiful, purposeful, and also restrained
Yep, very
pieces
much.
of cinematography I've ever seen in my life. Everything has this like.
ooh,
The colours in the film are deep and they are rich, and it's done by Gordon Willis,
who did Annie Hall?
who did Annie Hall and Manhattan and Zelig.
Oh, he did Zelig.
He did
Zelig
Zelig.
was awesome.
And yeah, the color palette is deep and rich and dark and moody, and the camera moves are when they're there and they're apparent, they're subtle and they're well implemented, and when static, it's beautifully framed. It has an edge of noir and it oozes atmosphere.
And to contrast that on a technicality perspective, the music is fucking killer. The music is amazing. We went on about The Exorcist, about how it's so subtle in its use of music. We went on about the film that we did, where it was quite often used as a lot of music. Not Love Actually, it was Road to Perdition. It uses quite a lot of music. This is, it hits every barrier. It doesn't use music that often, but when it does, my God, is it good. Obviously, you have the main theme and everything like that kicks in a couple of times in the major moments. Done by Nino Rota, if I mispronounced that.
But then he brought his father in, didn't he? So it's done by Nino Rota, but then he brought his father in afterwards to do a rework on it,
I did not know that.
who also
should know that.
did Apocalypse Now, if I remember right.
There we are. What, him or his father?
His father.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's stunning. It really is. It leads the it leads the film in such a way that you can't help but strive forward. It's. I can't remember what we were on about back in a review a while back. You have stuff that kind of like pushes you forward with the pace of the film, but not just like that kind of the way it's filmed, the way it's shot, the way that the characters are moving, like stuff like, you know, we're on about Kira Kurosawa, how he leads you forward in the frames. This, the music, but this also, as well as performances, like the music is just fucking exceptional.
It is. And then you mentioned there, so you kind of can't talk about The Godfather without giving a huge heaping of credit to the performances in this film.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
The most obvious one, right? Let's talk about this and get it out of the way. It's Marlon Brando.
Is this the one where he won an Academy Award but didn't do it because he was in protest?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, Marlon Brando, like, I just want to... Going into this for the first time, having not seen The Godfather before, but being immensely aware of the idea of The Godfather, and also having The Godfather so ingrained in the popular zeitgeist, you kind of know elements about Marlon Brando.
Yeah.
I was shocked at how little he's in this film
Yes. Yeah.
because he's in the first
I think this is
quarter,
the. No, sorry, go on.
then he disappears, and then when he comes back, he's back in it for a decent chunk, but he's also very subdued at that point. That's when he's passing off the mantle to Michael. So he's not the mob boss Godfather you know at the beginning. And I couldn't believe that that's all that exists of Marlon Brando, because it's a performance. Upon seeing it, you just want more of it. You want to see more of him on screen. Every moment that he's on screen, you're just drawn to him and his presence, and you want to know what he's going to do. He feels weirdly unpredictable, even though he never does anything that is unpredictable in this film, and it's because of this huge amount of power and respect he's commanding in his physical presence.
Yeah.
And then that is also being supported by the script and the way people are being written to come to this guy and openly ask questions with a sort of tentative nervousness about them.
There's two main scenes of Marlon Brando's Godfather, Vito Corleone. His acting ability to contrast one another, but to give examples of what Andy's saying there, is the first one was the intro. The intro is absolutely stunning. The intro is stunning.
It's iconic. There's no other word for it than iconic.
Yeah, you have a guy come in, he's breaking down, and you can see the frame is exceptional. You see the back of The Godfather, and just that little moment when he's breaking down, you see his hand movements like that. It's instant power, because this guy's you look at the frame, he's massive compared to this guy. He's got the arm moving like that, getting a drink, he drinks across like this, and then it comes down to the moment where it's on the guy said his piece, and then you see Brando, and then you see him, and then you do this, and he does all that, and he said, I'll help you out. That whole scene about the friend, then he goes and see Johnny, and just this amazing presence, this amazing commanding presence. How well do you act when you just got your back to a fucking camera, and all you do is a hand movement like this, and yes, the camera movement helped, and you just see this moment go across, that's stunning. But then to contrast that on a different level is when he's in bed, he's ill, and this is where Michael's gone to Sicily, and he goes, oh, yeah, all right, this, everything's all right, the business is fine, and the family's great. He's like this, where's Michael? And then they tell him oh, Michael did it, and he just goes like that.
Yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
there like this. I'm
See,
all my days.
I thought you were going to go. The third scene I can tack onto this, and if you don't mind, is the scene where he goes to.
When it's the five families and having a meeting, and he goes, that I do not, that I cannot forgive.
No, I was talking about where he
Great
goes
scene.
to arrange the coffin he goes for. You know, he goes to see the dude later on.
Oh,
about,
Sonny, yeah, Sonny.
Yeah, because Sonny's just been killed.
Yeah. And he goes, it's the guy that started the
And
film.
when he's told, yeah, exactly, it's him who he's
Full
gone back
circle.
to get his favour from. When Sonny's he's told that Sonny's dead, he doesn't react in a sort of big outburst. He does that calm, right? Let's take care of everything. You get that lingering camera movement where he's allowed to stand in the hallway for a second, and then he finally kind of lets out in front of a stranger.
Yeah. Fucking.
So
That's just Marlon Brando.
that's Marlon Brando. The obvious one is
Al Pacino.
Al Pacino did huge.
Killer. Absolute killer in this film. This is one of his subdued performances. So Al
It
Pacino
is.
is nowadays known as.
Yeah.
We know Al Pacino nowadays. He's part of the characters. One
Yeah,
of the
he's
characters,
known for being this huge sort of personality. He's known for actually overacting, if anything.
which is kind of overacting, but I would say that is an example of Godfather.
No,
We'll-
no, not
we'll
at all.
come on to that in later, as you probably hear. But in his performance, you have a guy who's not naive. He's just a bit of he's the quiet one of the family and everything like this.
He feels like the black sheep at first.
Yeah, the black sheep, and then he comes in and he's and it's just that simple thing. He's talking to Kay, and he's just oh, this is my family. You had that guy shot. This is just what they do, and he's kind of head down. It's almost like he's not antisocial. He's almost like he's a bit more introverted as opposed to extroverted. Where everyone else, you've got Sonny, who's a big loud man, he cares for the family, and he gets a bit aggressive stuff like this. You've got Tom, who's a bit hugely composed, but he's also the one that's the front face of the family when it's dealing with political kind of stuff. And then you've got Michael, who's just quiet, composed like this. And then obviously you have that scene where he ends up topping the cutler, and so it's Salazzo.
So, before you move over that,
Yep.
I think that is where the film absolutely culminated into everything it promised in the first half. That is where I think the cinematography, married with the music, married with
What,
the
that scene?
performances, married with the directing. The scene where he goes into the diner
Again, I'm pretty sure that's the main theme coming across again.
yeah, and The best thing is they hold off on it for the entire scene until after the moment's done. And it's when he leaves, that's when you get this sort of booming music.
Yeah.
It's probably the loudest mix in the entire film.
Yeah.
And then to have the balls on Coppola to have a sequence take place where these two characters are having a discussion in Italian and to not put subtitles
I love
on
that
it.
stuff. I love that stuff. It happens quite often in the Godfather series where they have these conversations that don't need to know what they're saying. So you know what I was saying before, like all the dialogue is relevant to what they're doing. Only the scenes that are subtitled have relevancy towards what the Godfather is.
Yeah.
But that's just adding a bit of atmosphere when it's unsubtitled.
It's also like in that particular moment, it's letting you focus in on Michael, on Al Pacino, because in his head, he doesn't give a shit about what they're talking about either. Like he's having that conversation, but it doesn't matter because he's thinking about other things and lets us as an audience kind of step outside of that, get rid of all the noise and just have a look at what's going on. Now, I think Coppola in the past has said that like he didn't subtitle that sequence because they were talking too fast.
Really?
I don't know if that's him being sort of like director flippant and actually had this other intention, but I think regardless, it works in terms of letting us just focus on Michael and what's about to happen.
And then obviously you've got the second half where he starts becoming the person he starts, but the family's interested in. One slight subtle note, just to go on this, we mentioned about films before where time shifts and sometimes it's like massive in your face, or it's been 2 years later. In this, it's so fucking well done. Like, it's just a little like, oh, it's been a year since I saw you, or it's been like this, like that.
I'll be honest, it threw me at first.
Oh, man.
It really did, just
Second
because
time,
it was very much like cut, and then suddenly in that one cut, without any sort of like fade or suggestion of time, things had happened. And it did throw me, but by the time I got to the end, I appreciated. I felt like I'd spent years with these people.
Yeah. It's something where there's times you feel it because you see I mean, the production team, fucking what the costume team, what they've done to the people to make them all look fucking wow. And then you've got Michael later on. Obviously, he meets his Apollina, sorry, his wife, his first wife. That's shocking the car scene, you know.
Which this is what I found so funny about this film. So obviously, everyone talks about Godfather having part 1, part 2. But Godfather 1 feels like it's a film of 2 parts anyway.
Yep.
When you get to the end of that sort of like diner scene, that's basically the end of part 1.
Yep.
And then you pick up with him in
His rise
Sicily.
to Howard's rise to being the head of the family and everything like
Yeah.
this. You've got a lovely scene where he's sat in the chair like this. It's first you've got Michael in the chair in the right, and you've got Vito in the centre chair. Then Vito stands up. Michael sits in the centre chair, and I think it's like the final scene that you probably put as the subtitle, where what's his name? He's got his hand on there like that.